The mark of an intelligent mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. Aristotle, John Rose. I love that quote, and yes, I use it quite often because it applies so much on the hero's journey. And I especially appreciate it for my YouTube channel because it helps me realize just how special my YouTube channel is. For the obvious reason, I do not tote the status quo, do I, guys? I'm pretty much saying the opposite of what we've been told most of our lives, which explains why I keep losing some subscribers, because it's hard to entertain some ideas. They've been entrenched in our mind for so long. We've got so many references that support some of our beliefs, and two of the worst beliefs that get us in trouble the most is when people say, my number one priority is protein. I heard that the other day watching Naked and Afraid. My number one priority is protein. Protein, where do you get your protein? Well, why are you destroying half your protein when you throw it in the fire, you fool? Do you know that? We lose half the biological value of protein when we cook it, when we alter it. And of course, if it's not living, it's not going to have any of that great sunlight energy that we store in the nucleus of our cells that helps the cells communicate and feed our sixth sense, our spidey sense. That's that feeling that we know we're all one with one another. Of course, the other false belief that we have so many references that support that drives me bananas, and I'm sure I'm losing some subscribers every now and then when they hear this one, that has to do with the contagion myth. And that ties into the germ theory disease. It's not quite the same thing. This is why it gets a little complicated when you start thinking about what's wrong with the germ theory. And it's difficult to get this message out because when you present the terrain theory, instead of people looking at the terrain theory in its entirety and trying to understand it and see how it makes sense with both non-infectious diseases and infectious diseases, what is one of the first things they do? These people who still haven't caught on to the terrain theory, they try to defend the germ theory. They go, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Isn't this contagious? Isn't this contagious? Sit down before a fact like a little child, my friends, and be prepared to give up every preconceived notion. Follow humbly to whatever abyss nature leads you, or you shall learn nothing. We've got to learn to empty our cup in order to wake up from the nightmare we're living in right now, where we think our number one priority is protein, and we believe that when we get sick, it's not our fault. We blame it on someone else. We caught your cold, we caught your flu, and yet in numerous scientific experiments, they try to give people colds and flus by giving them all the germs, and it doesn't work. When they tried germ warfare, they found that the germ itself does not cause the problem. They had to attach a chemical to it. And of course, now they're using nanotechnology to make things appear contagious. Interesting word, contagious. And how do we make sense out of the germ theory and the terrain theory? Well, think of it this way. We're living systems, we're not non-living systems. We need an environment to sustain us. Now let's think of that environment and all those things we need in it as our context. Now the quality of our context determines the quality of our lives. The better the context, the better our lives. It's really pretty simple. The better the air, the better the water, the better the food, the better the quality of our lives. But what about people who have histoplasmosis? What if they got mold in their home? Isn't that contagious? Or what about the germ theory? Okay, now here's the point where there's things that can cause problems like fungus and parasites. Sure, those can cause problems. They're not supposed to be inside of us. When we look at air pollution, there's external pollution, there's indoor pollution. Indoor pollution is a really big problem for us folks. Things like mold make us believe, well, there is a germ theory. But is it contagious? If your house has got a bunch of mold and now you have that mold in you, Are you contagious? Can you give your histoplasmosis to someone else? Of course not. So of course there are things inside the germ theory that can be problematic, obviously. If a river starts getting dehydrated, the concentration of bacteria is higher in there, and people can have problems from that. So yeah, there's a contagion element there, just like there's a contagion element with air pollution. Now how about food poisoning? You hear this one all the time too, don't you? A lot of people don't realize that many times when people think they caught a cold or a flu, especially a flu, it's really food poisoning. And that explains why a lot of people can be sick. The whole family came down with an illness. How did that happen if it's not contagious? Well, there is a contagion element. We're all eating the same contaminated food. Now, how about histoplasmosis? My little niece, several decades ago, came down with some lung nodules. Remember, nodules, that's the fourth stage of disease. When we look at the terrain theory disease, we have 2 short-term self-limited diseases, which explain the infectious diseases, and then we have 4 long-term stages of disease that explain the non-infectious diseases. And I go into more detail in that, where I explain disease mysteries revealed, causes and solutions. The powers that be don't want us to know. I'll put a link down below in the description box and in a pinned comment so you can look at that. But when you look at those 4 long-term stages of disease, the last stage is where the body's trying to protect itself whenever something gets inside of us that doesn't belong there, like some mold. And what does the body do? Well, it can create tumors and cysts and fibroids and nodules. These are calcifications, you see. The body's trying to protect itself. The same thing happens when we have kidney stones or gallstones. We've got too many acids inside the body that can damage it, so the body uses calcium to pull that out and draw it out and protect itself. It's part of our defense mechanism. If you're having kidney stones and you think you're healthy, you're not, because you're too acidic. That's why you came down with the stones. So the point about my little niece coming down with lung nodules, no one else in the family came down with lung nodules, because she was very weak. She would be the weakest of the family. Her mother was a very weakly child. So we do inherit weaknesses from our parents, and we do even inherit genetic defects, which was illustrated quite nicely in the Pottinger cat study. I'll digress for a moment. This is a story worth telling. Dr. Pottinger went through around 900 cats in a 10-year period of time, fed them different foods, made them eat it the way we eat it, cooked it for them, and then he let them eat it the way they'd eat it in nature, raw. And he noticed that the cats that ate the raw food, they didn't develop any birth defects, and yet the cats that ate the food that was denatured had more and more birth defects every generation. He even measured the calcium in the cat's bones, and the calcium went from 17% in the first generation to 9% in the second, all the way down to 4% in the third. The bones were elongating, getting brittle. The cats were looking bigger, but that's because the bones were elongating. But the bones were not stronger, they were brittle. So sure, we can inherit genetic defects, but mainly what we inherit when it comes to what doctors say we have a genetic predisposition for is we inherit the weaknesses. You see, whenever a child is born, the quality of that baby depends upon the quality of the sperm and the egg of the parents at the time. This is a huge deciding factor. That's why many times the youngest child in the family might be the sickest, unless the parents figured out something and they start eating better, and they're actually in better shape when they were conceiving their last child than they were in their first one. And a good way to illustrate that one, it would be to share what happened with Jay Cordish, the juice man. I remember I saw Jay Cordish back in 1990. In fact, it was this very month. It would be my 30th anniversary. June 1st is when I discovered the most valuable knowledge in the world. And Jay Cordish came into town at the Marriott. It had 1,000 people. He was up there selling his champion juicer. I went out and bought a juicer that day. But anyway, Jay tells a story about meeting his wife and how they had their first child. Now, his wife was 30 years younger than him. He was around 52. She was around 22. He found her. She was a sickly child, young woman. He healed her, and they fell in love. Their first child came out with an APGAR scale on a 7, scale of 1 to 10. They came in at a 7. Their second child that they had after Jay Cordish had a chance to pump more vegetable and fruit juices into her, and she was healthier. They had their second child, and that baby came out with an APGAR rating of a 10. And the hospital said they'd never had a 10 rating before. Again, this determines how healthy is this baby when it's born. So if you guys are going to have a family, you want to consider what kind of genes are you going to be passing on. What's the quality of your sperm? What's the quality of your egg? You want to prepare for birth by producing the best quality contributors you can. So if you have a child and you're already having intestinal problems, guess what your child's going to have? A genetic predisposition for that. They're going to have weaknesses in that area. Doesn't mean they're going to have problems, because they could adhere to their species-specific diet and they might not have any problems at all. And they may. Just depends on what kind of damage is done. But the key is most people don't even know what their species-specific diet is. And as a result, they're going to eat the wrong food. And what's going to manifest? Well, it's going to depend upon where your weakness is at. So if your family has weak kidneys, you'll have kidney issues. If your family has weak intestines, you'll have intestinal issues. But the key is to understand that these genetic weaknesses only determine where we get sick, not how we get sick. The deciding factor in this case is, what are we doing? Are we following the advice of the Pottage of Cat study? What should we glean from this study? It's obvious. When you look at the study in its entirety, the cats that ate the cooked food developed all the same problems that we do. The illnesses, the ill behaviors, the birth defects. The cats that ate the raw food, they didn't develop those problems. He would take those cats and put them back on the raw food, and those problems would go away. Think about how profound that is, and what it's all doing with. It has to do with the terrain. So again, when you try to help people understand the terrain theory, what are they going to do? They're going to try to reinforce the germ theory. You got to slap them out of that. Say, no, no, no. You got to look at the other version first in its entirety. I even did a video on how to evaluate historical evidence. The same applies when you have an opposing theory. Every time someone presents an opposing theory, and you have an intelligent mind and you'll entertain that theory, you got to look at that theory in its entirety before you start reinforcing your old theory. And then you can compare the two. And as I mentioned in my video on how to evaluate historical evidence, once you look at all the other evidence and you've got a balanced equation, now you want to look at both of these sides and say they're both true and they're both false. And then when you look at whether they're false, what you're going to find is one version is going to be loaded with deception. Loaded with deception. All over the place, deception, 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 deception. Now for many of y'all, it's going to be hard for you to see this deception unless you've actually studied psychopathy. If you don't know how a psychopath works, if you don't know their MO, you won't recognize what they're doing as easily. And remember, all psychopaths are con artists, so you also have to understand what con artists do. And it's all about deception. It's all about sleight of hand. And when we look at the germ theory, it's full of deception. Right off the bat, these people are lying to us by claiming that vaccines eradicated smallpox and polio and measles and whooping cough and all these other type of so-called contagious diseases. And that's an outright lie. I did a video just recently on that. I'll put a link down below on how do you know whether or not our experts are lying. It's simple. They're already lying to us. They lied to us to try to establish their credibility. That's where they get their credibility. Look at us. We eradicated these diseases. No, you can look at graphs from the 1800s, middle 1800s to middle 1900s. All those diseases were going away because they were diseases of poor sanitation. The only exception would be polio. That was caused by DDT. And the city of San Angelo, Texas, was so afraid of polio back then, they went out and bought 2 DDT fogging machines. And they covered their city with this DDT. Now, in America, 1 out of 3,775 people were coming down with polio, but not in San Angelo, Texas. No, it was 1 out of 125 people were coming down with polio because they were exposed to DDT. Think how evil these people are that are controlling the education we teach our doctors, that they would spray poison on our food
And then, when it paralyzes us, which it's supposed to, that's what DDT is. It's what all pesticides are. They're neurotoxins. They paralyze insects. And when we become paralyzed, it's a virus. It's a virus. They're lying, folks. Vaccines never eradicated any disease. And we also know they're lying every time they deny the obvious vaccine autism connection. My God, 1 out of 22 boys are now born with autism. And we know that vaccines cause autism. Watch Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2. Or better yet, just go right straight to the horse's mouth in this one. Look at the manufacturer's inserts. Take a look at DPT. Take a good look at the manufacturer's inserts about vaccines under the side effects. It says right there, autism as a side effect. You see, they know the only way they can be sued in courts is if they don't warn you about things. So it's on their inserts. They deny it everywhere else, but it's on their inserts. They're lying. Deception, deception, deception. Look at the terrain theory in its entirety. It explains what happens with non-infectious diseases. The body goes through 4 stages. I go in more detail again in that one video. I won't talk about it now. The infectious diseases, that gets a little more complicated. But we have 2 short-term self-limited diseases. That explains all of that. Again, I'm not going to go into any more detail because I already did an extensive video on that. Please watch that video. I'll be sure and add links to that. So, when you're on the hero's journey, folks, you have to realize not everyone's ready for this message. It really does take an intelligent mind to consider the possibility that all those references they have in their brain might be wrong. And again, when they want to look at an opposing theory, what do most people do? They look at each item one by one by one by one. They take the first item and say, well, let's take a look at this one. Well, wait a second, I don't think that's true because my theory says this. And I kind of believe my theory is right because I also got all these other references. That's why you got to balance the equations. Whenever you look at an opposing theory, you got to look at all the evidence on the other side. Imagine if it was all reversed and everyone believed in the terrain theory and then someone came along, well, wait a second, we got the germ theory. If you had an intelligent mind, you would look at the germ theory in its entirety. Even though you could blow it out of the water right away, you think, why should I waste my time? Well, I got an intelligent mind, I'll look at it. I'll look at everything they say. I'll consider it true and false, just like I'll consider my theory true and false, the terrain theory, that we all believe it, if that's where we were at. But wait a second, I don't see any deception over here, but over here, they're claiming the vaccines eradicated smallpox and measles, whooping cough. They deny there's a connection with autism, but they put it in their inserts. Do they lie anywhere else? No, when it comes to these non-infectious diseases, they admit they don't know the cause. What gives you the right to have a monopoly on treating non-infectious diseases when your whole theory or your whole system is based on a germ theory, which has never been scientifically proven? It's based on antiquated, bad science, and then the testing is bogus. So how do you get people to empty their cup, my friends? I've said this many times before. I create a very special teaching tool to show the logical fallacies in the systems in charge. I call it the ultimate schematic. I won't go any further there, but there's always links in my in the description box and on my channel for the ultimate schematic. You need to learn more about that. But when it comes to looking at the specifics and the details or the contents of an argument, for some of us, there's not a darn thing we can say to convince these people. There's only one thing they can do, and that's prove it to themselves. People keep saying, give me some scientific proof, John. Do it. Take a solid food vacation. Within days, you will see all the proof you need. It's scientific proof. It's concrete, verifiable proof that you're full of stuff that doesn't belong inside you. Now, you're not going to see the mold coming out like you will Beelzebub or the serpent, as Victor Hugo called it. But this stuff that we have inside our bellies, you can see, and there's no denying it. And the world's waking up to it. You got people all around the world doing this and documenting it. Look into this in more detail. Look at the terrain theory in its entirety before you start trying to punch holes and saying, oh, wait a second,
We've got some parasites going on over here. We got some fungus going on over here. How do you explain that with the contagious theory? Again, the germ theory promotes the contagious theory, or the contagion myth. It's ironic as hell that we believe we need the protein that's going to damage the kidneys. Now our lymph system doesn't get filtered. It backs up and creates the colds and flus, and we blame that on contagion. It takes an intelligent mind, folks, to wake up to that. That's why I'm so excited about my subscribers. And I'm getting close to the 100,000 mark. I'm hoping I'll reach that on my birthday. That'll be June 17th. That's the way I'm going right now. I'm going to be just a little shy, I think. I never know. It all depends on one video that gets more hits than all the rest and is exposed to people who don't know about me. But we'll see. The only other way I can see my channel growing is for you guys to keep doing what you're doing. And I want to thank you. You're doing this. You're uploading videos. You're showing what comes out of you. And remember, document all this regardless of whether or not you think you want to show anybody. At least have it on your own phone so that if someone says you shouldn't do it, you can go, wait a second. Look what came out of me today. You're trying to tell me I should have that in me? What's wrong with you? You don't have an intelligent mind? In fact, I kind of have a little trouble with that word ability. I love Aristotle, brilliant mind. But since his time, we've learned a few other things, I would hope in a couple thousand years. One of the things that I've learned that's helped me understand everything better is called the performance equation. I've done several videos on this and even tied it into Bernoulli's formula. The performance equation equals ableness times willingness. Obviously, right? The more willing and able we are, the better we can perform at something. But our ability is limited by our ability to perform, but then it's going to be magnified by our willingness to perform. That willingness factor is a huge factor. So an intelligent mind, do they have the ability, or is it really the willingness to perform? Could you simply have an intelligent mind because you're willing? You might not have as many brain cells holding hands as some people who are considered intelligent. But hey, I'm willing to entertain an idea. I don't have to be brilliant to look at the obvious when we compare an opposing theory to the status quo. And then how about Bernoulli's formula? One of my favorites. The expected value of doing something equals the value of doing it times the odds of doing it. Well, let me think. The carnivore diet, the value of doing it, I think it's worth 0. The odds of doing it, there's another 0. What do I think of the carnivore diet? It's a big 0. How about the raw vegan diet? What do most people think about that? The value of doing it? Well, a lot of people don't know the value of doing it. That's what's so sad about it, but a lot of people do find out about it, and that's how this message has gotten as far as it has. Most people find this message when they get sick, and they find someone else that got sick, and they went to raw food, and they healed themselves. But then again, we've got that other one, the odds of doing it. And of course, we can apply this to a solid food vacation also. So what are the benefits of a solid food vacation? A lot of people don't know it. What are the odds of doing it? Well, it reminds me of Joe Cross's documentary, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. For you guys who've seen it, remember he spends the first 30 days in New York, then he spends the other 30 days going across the nation, telling everybody about what's happening to him, how great it's making him feel. And what does everybody say to him? Well, I'm so happy for you, Joe. It looks good. I'm glad it's working for you. But I could never do that. One of my favorite lines, right? I could never do that. You guys are shooting yourself in the foot. How do you know you can't do something? But that's what we're up against. The value of doing it. Do they really understand the value? The odds of doing it, they don't think they can. Not realizing how easy it is and how much fun it is. So, is it an ability factor, a willingness factor, a perception factor? When it comes right down to it, folks, It's all knowledge. That's why Socrates was right. The problem, knowledge is the key to all of our problems. People will say, oh, we've got free will. We don't. Our free will is limited. Sure, I have a free will. I can choose this versus that. But my choices are limited. Free will is limited, folks, based on our own experiences, as well as our imaginations and our ability to conceptualize. And I'm referring to that great personality test I've done over a dozen videos on called Personalysis. If you haven't watched any of those guys, you got to watch this too, because Socrates was right about a lot of things. Knowledge is the key to all of our problems. He also said you got to know thyself. And he would have been more accurate if he would have said know thyself and know others. And that's hard to do unless you have access to the knowledge. So knowledge is the key right here, folks. We don't have it. What we've been given is wrong. It's designed to take away our responsibility. And we should question every belief we have if it takes away our responsibility. The germ theory and the contagion myth takes away our responsibility. We need to question those with an open mind. We've got to be a Buddhist and entertain more than one possibility at the same time. Hey guys. And above all, believe only your own experience. There is no fact like a fact learned from your own life. Aristotle once again nailed it on the head. We can't trust our experts. We know they're lying. A lot of people don't know this, but our educational systems are controlled. Foster Gamble pointed that out in the Thrive documentary. I'll put a link down below for that documentary. And of course, the Norman Dodd interview. I'll put a link to that also. You need to watch the Norman Dodd interview. Norman Dodd was the chief investigator of the Reese Committee back in 1954. Congress decided to investigate these tax-exempt corporations. They had access to the minutes of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Endowment. And they were very blatant in their minutes. They didn't think anyone else would be reading it. But they came out and said, we tried to get the current historians, people like John and Mary Bird, to change history for us and lie about World War I. They wouldn't do it. We only have one option. We got to create our own stable of historians. Watch the Norman Dodd interview, folks. In fact, there's another video I did. I believe is what are the lessons we are supposed to learn. I believe that's the one. If it's not, I'll be sure and correct it on it right now. But look for that one also, where I include a little snippet from the Norman Dodd interview, the part where he explains that they say we got to create our own stable of historians. We want 20 new PhDs. We'll create this this program, and we'll only make sure that we enroll the people that we know will lie for us. And I like that video because I also paired that up with that little small speech from Bill Gates in 2015. We talked about these three main events that happened last century. So let's look at the death charts of last century. The first main event, World War I, 25 million people were murdered, or died rather. And then World War II, here's another spike in the death chart. We had 65 million from World War II. But there's one more spike that Bill Gates references to. And he says it's the same size as World War II, another 65 million. Now, if you watch the virus, no, not the virus, the swine flu vaccination fraud of 1976 on 60 Minutes, you'll see Gerald Ford comes out and says, oh my God, the virus that caused the 1918 flu pandemic, it's here again, it's happening again, it's the same virus. It killed 500,000 people in America and 20 million worldwide. Again, jumping back to where I was a second ago, Bill Gates, 65 million people died. So what we're looking at here are these three main events that killed a lot of people last century. They had to do with 2 wars and 1 pandemic. 3 main events. Those 3 main events tie in to 2 false beliefs. I already told you one in this video. That's the contagion myth that has to do with the 1918 Spanish flu. The other myth that I've alluded to many times on my channel has to do with the illusion of scarcity. That has to do with the 2 wars. Those wars had everything to do with the powers that be taking control over a country's money supply and making them debt slaves. When you break away from that system, you are attacked, you are demonized. They lie the hell out of it to make sure you don't look into detail about what that message was all about. So if you have an intelligent mind, you'll consider the possibility that history's wrong. Norman Dodd proved that. We got to control the historians. Watch the Thrive document by Foster Gamble. We investigated 12 major sectors of human endeavor. Follow the money, and every one are controlled, owned and controlled by the same small group of people. The media, same people. Pharmaceutical companies, the same people. Everything that is used to control what we know, so that can in turn control what we do, is owned and controlled by a small group of people. And they're molding our minds so easily that we go on shows like Naked and Afraid and go, my number one priority is protein. Or, I gotta wear a mask to keep that virus from getting me. Gotta look at these people with masks on, and I look at these big bellies on them, I'm thinking, God, if you just understood how you're being deceived, how wearing that mask is promoting the germ theory. In fact, almost everything that's happening right now is to put reassurance, not quite the word I was looking for, in the germ theory. It wants to reinforce the germ theory, a resurgence of the germ theory. It was on its way out, but now look what happened. Now they have non-stop on TV and the news, I don't watch any of it, I assume they're still doing that, about how bad this pandemic is. And you got to cover your face, and you got to stand 6 feet away. We got a new normal now. This is all designed to reinforce this one huge false belief that has paralyzed us. I hope this is the first time you've seen one of my YouTube videos, because I say in my videos, there is the ultimate tool of control and the absolute tool of control. The ultimate tool of control is our health, number one. That's why we're so sick. That's why doctors don't know anything. That's why they're clueless. That's why they're taught this bogus germ theory disease, and they don't understand the terrain theory. And then the absolute tool of control is the money that they use to then own and control everything. So when you look at those three main events, they tie into two big lies. One is that there's not enough. There's no abundance on this planet. That's a lie. The other lie is that germs are responsible for our problems. And again, I can understand why some people are still going to struggle when people try to reinforce the germ theory. Say, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Stop focusing on that for now. Look at the big picture. Look at what the terrain theory is saying. Look at how many people are dying every year, and from what? It's the terrain, folks. The heart disease, the cancer, and all the other horrible things, the diabetes, the arthritis, the pain and the suffering we're going through has to do with our terrain. And that's why I love a solid food vacation, because it can change our terrain faster than anything else. And when we make a drastic change in our terrain like that, we have a light bulb moment within a week, because we're seeing stuff coming out of us every day. The average man I coach loses 10 pounds in the first week. The average woman, 7 pounds in the first week. In 30 days, the average woman, 20 pounds. The average man, 30 pounds. By taking a solid food vacation. You won't be hungry. Your energy level is going to skyrocket. You're going to drastically change your terrain, and then you're going to start understanding the terrain theory better. And you may still struggle understanding certain types of what appear to be contagious diseases. And it's hard to really understand when you hear people say what happens, because you never have enough detail, do you? How's everyone sleeping? Is everybody eating the same food? Is there food poisoning? Are they inside a place where there's indoor pollution? Remember, indoor pollution is a big problem in our society, and we spend so much time indoors. So those are issues you have to be aware of. And for my subscribers, food's not a panacea. We have two groups of needs. Food is one of the 12 essential needs. But then we have these two additional temporary needs. Things can get a little complicated if we're damaged somehow. That's why our species-specific diet doesn't always work for everybody, because we don't live in an ideal world anymore. We've got this other group of needs. Cause and effect the ripple effect I go over in much more detail in my other videos. Again, I hope this is the very first video you've seen of mine, and that you've had a chance now to open up your mind, empty your cup, entertain the possibility that there may be a different theory, a different version that you haven't heard before. And once you do that long enough, every time you find something, you take a step back, and all of a sudden you got enough pieces of the puzzle to make sense out of it. It kind of reminds me of what happens to astronomers when they look out in space. When they look out in space, if they focus their telescope too narrowly, it appears chaotic. But then when they zoom back out, they get to see more pieces of the puzzle, and now it's starting to make sense. That's why I created the ultimate schematic. It has 6 boxes, 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom. They all logically connect. There's 18 connections. So there's 24 places where you can put knowledge. And you put all the knowledge in all these different places. Now imagine looking through a telescope, you only have so many pieces. And I was thinking of this the other day, and I think it kind of works. Imagine if I was to look into a sky at night, and I'm looking at the Big Dipper, but I'm looking through my hand like a telescope, and all I see is a couple stars. What happens as I open up my hand? Oh, it's the Big Dipper. Now I have enough pieces to see how they all connect. This is the problem that most of us have. We don't have enough pieces to the puzzle, and we have a hard time connecting them because we don't know where they go. So I have been accused, or my channel has been accused, of having somewhat of a learning curve, because it does take a little bit of work to understand how that ultimate schematic works, but I guarantee you it's worth the time to understand that we have 3 stages of knowledge: thoughts, actions, reactions, that tie into 5 stages of reality. What precedes our thoughts would be our awareness. Our awareness is our ability to have a thought before a thought, and what precedes our awareness? Our consciousness. That's our awareness of our awareness. So we have our consciousness, that's our awareness of our awareness. We have an awareness, that's an awareness of our thoughts, which are then followed by our actions and reactions. So those 3 stages of knowledge are crucial to understand how to see that we're being tricked. And I won't go into any more detail here. I actually produced an 11-part video series long ago that ties into the ultimate schematic. I call it the ultimate solution. I was extremely vague at that point because I didn't want people to shut off their frontal lobe. Many times, as soon as they hear the word diet, they don't want to hear another word. So I was vague intentionally for a reason, but in that 11-part video series, the last 8 of those videos, I go over all the pieces I've identified in my special teaching tool, so that you can have a better understanding of the big picture. Because you're on the hero's journey, all of my subscribers out there. And if you're new, you're beginning on the hero's journey. First step on this hero's journey is you have the ears, the spiritual ears, to hear this message. Second step, you accept the mission. I'm going to prove this to myself. I'm going to take me a solid food vacation, go the length of time I need to, because I don't want to put new wine in an old container. And then I'm going to put the best wine in my container. My species-specific diet. And I might need to modify it if I'm not getting enough sunshine, or not getting enough B12, or if I'm not converting DHA. Those could be issues. And then once you accept the mission and you prove this to yourself, you continue on the hero's journey. You gather more knowledge and allies, and that's where my special teaching tool comes into play, so you can make sure and put all the information in the right place. You also have to understand the obstacles on the hero's journey. Again, my special teaching tool explains that. That's where those 18 portals come into play. 2 of which we have to go through to solve our problems, because that's where the obstacles are at. Goes back to the performance equation. Performance equals ableness times willingness. But there are limitations in our opportunity to learn. There are obstacles, there are 19 obstacles, 19 reasons why we don't know that are in that very first doorway. That's keeping us from finding the knowledge we need up here in the plus A box of knowledge. And again, performance is ability times willingness, so we got to be willing to go through that next doorway, where we also have more obstacles that can get in our way. And I've identified 21 total problems of knowledge, 55 altogether, because they strike twice. The obstacles that keep us from finding the knowledge can also keep us from applying it. And then, of course, the big one is the willingness to apply it. And 21 main problems of knowledge, that's 55 total problems of knowledge. And the one problem of knowledge that we should focus on is our willingness to apply what we know. I labeled that piece 54.5, I believe. Or is it 55.4? 54.5. And I learned not too long ago, I realized not too long ago, that when you look at those 7 ways we can be unwilling to apply things, we can be unwilling to believe it's false, we can be unwilling to look for things, we can be unwilling to listen to things, and we can be unwilling to believe things. So the next thing is our willingness to apply it. That's why it's piece 54.5, because the first 4 are in the first doorway that's keeping us from finding the knowledge. But then, either once we believe it or once we decide to test it, then we are applying what we know. And we don't even have to believe what we know to apply it. That's why I say over and over in my videos, test an idea as time has come. Accept this mission on the hero's journey. Prove to yourself this concept of the terrain versus the germ. Take responsibility. Right now, our whole planet is being controlled because of our belief system, because we believe in the contagion myth, and it's almost impossible to rattle this myth out of people's belief system due to the enormous amount of references that we have ever since we can remember. It's enormous. I have not had a cold or a flu in over 30 years, and I won't have a cold or a flu because colds and flus come from the bathroom backing up. I won't have that problem. You can prove this to yourself. That's why the hero's journey is so powerful. And don't forget the very last part of the hero's journey. 5 main stages. Do you have the ears to hear it? Are you going to accept the mission? Are you going to go out there and gather allies and more information? Are you going to understand those obstacles that we're up against? Are you going to share it? That's number 5. Now, you know what happens when you share it, folks. When you share this information, now you get to really reap the benefits of doing it. I mean, it's one thing to experience a solid food vacation and our species-specific diet for ourselves and notice how it improves the quality of our lives, because we improve the quality of our context, remember? But when you can help someone else wake up to that possibility, and they don't have to have this intelligent mind to entertain a thought without accepting it. Most people have the motivation. They're in pain. Big motivator, pain. That's what I said earlier. Most people who find our species-specific diet do so because they were sick. And they found someone else that got better because they corrected those dietary mistakes. And I know from experience, the easiest and fastest way to correct all 5 main mistakes we're making relative to 5 things we mastered and made 5 bad applications is to take a solid food vacation on a temporary basis for the appropriate length of time, so we can not only have that light bulb moment that happens within the first week because we're still pooping, but we want that aha moment where we totally flush the serpent out of our system and we bump up the coherent sunlight energy that we store in the nucleus of our cells that helps us feel one with everything. It changes our mentality. Once we do that, folks, life changes. Now we've got meaning in our lives. Now we can wake up every day and think, what am I going to get to do today? What can I do today? You possess knowledge most people don't have if you watch my YouTube channels. Very few people know this. A lot of people aren't ready. It's up to you guys to figure out a clever way, in your own way, to convince others how powerful this is. And as I mentioned before, there's not a whole lot we can say except be a good example. Show pictures of that stuff that's coming at you. Picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it? Do whatever it takes to convince people to go at least 1 week, because if they go at least 1 week, the light bulb's going to go off. They're going to want to keep going. They're going to realize life's an illusion. You know, I've coached so many people. It usually takes more around the second week before I start hearing people say, you know, I don't think I ever want to eat again. I can't remember ever feeling this good. And all they did is take a vacation from solid food. Such a simple concept, so profound, it's been mentioned throughout history. Every religion talks about taking a solid food vacation. And before the chemical revolution in the 40s, the 1940s, a solid food vacation on water was something that was safe and doable, as long as you didn't have to take a vacation from life, or unless you couldn't take a vacation from life, which nowadays very few people can do. Of course, a lot of people are still laid off. You don't have a job, so this is an opportune time for this message to explode. In fact, if this message doesn't explode, too many people have gotten too many references from this whole ordeal we're going through that reinforce this germ theory. These people, you know, we got books in our brains relative to belief system, and that Contagion Myth book just exploded inside most people's brains. I mean, it's so big, I'm surprised they can think of anything else but the virus, the virus, the virus. And that's pretty much what's happening, isn't it? Our brains are so easily molded, it's frightening. But man, we can snap out of that quickly. That's why I love Victor Hugo. There's one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come. How in the world can an idea defeat all the armies in the world? It's because we've got the wrong mentality. That idea will change our mentality. It's not that we're going to think our way out of it. That idea is we got to go back to our species-specific diet. We got to go back to eating our biophotons so we have our sixth sense and we don't have a dark side to our behavior. And we don't have a serpent inside of us. Having a serpent inside of us and an inadequate level of biophotons are two huge contributing factors to the dark side of our behavior. And again, I plead with you guys, every belief you have that takes away your responsibility needs to be looked at again with adult eyes, because a lot of those beliefs came at an early age. And even if they didn't come at an early age, they need to be reviewed one more time. Every belief that takes away our responsibility has to be looked at, because it's being done by design. Morning, guys. So, I guess I'll finish by saying how much pleasure my YouTube channel has brought me in the last several years. Can't begin to tell you how it warms my heart knowing that there are so many people who are willing to do this and continue on the hero's journey and make a difference on this planet. I've always been a very optimistic person. And sometimes, if you think about where we're at and where most people are at, sometimes it's easy to get overwhelmed. But I know what I'm proposing is not unrealistic whatsoever. Bill Bright had 14 million people in 1 year taking a solid food vacation on juices. We could do that easily. And if everyone uploaded their videos and documented what came out of them, this world will change. Perhaps what we need to do, what few subscribers I have compared to other channels that have millions, we need to figure out everybody who has any type of audience and appeal to them to do this. If you know anybody who has millions and millions of subscribers, you know any celebrity who's in the public eye, get their attention. Get them to take a solid food vacation. Think about it. That's why I did my last video on Joe Rogan. He's got a lot of subscribers. He's got a lot of people watching his podcast. If someone like that could embrace this message, and another person did it, and another person did it, and another person did it, my God, within a week, this idea could explode. And man, oh man, we'll all be in for a treat.